Okay, good morning, everyone. It's Thursday morning, March 25th, and this is the Agricultural Committee meeting. And this morning, we're going to have a go through with Michael O'Grady on the raw milk bill. I believe it's H218. And so, Michael, if welcome, and if you, I guess, Julie, I don't know if you've met everybody, but we can introduce ourselves fairly quick here. We may as well run through the roster and the guest. And I'm Bobby Starr, and I chair the Senate Ag meeting.
Good morning. I'm Chris Pearson, Senator from Chittenden County.
Good morning. I'm Anthony Polina, Washington County. Sorry. Washington County
Brian
Senator.
Collmore from the Rutland County District.
And we, Corey Parent, Senator Parent from Franklin County, and he's going to be joining us a little bit later. Kent, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you. Kent Henderson. I'm a retired veterinarian representing the Vermont Veterinary Medical Association Government Relations Committee this morning.
And Julie?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Julie Smith. I'm also a veterinarian and a PhD employed as a research associate professor in the Department of Animal and Veterinary Sciences at the University of Vermont.
Well, thank you, Julie and Kent, for being with us. Michael O'Grady is our legislative council person that does our drafting, and I thought we'd have him run through the bill, and then we'll discuss it and take testimony from you folks. So. Michael, if you'd like to get started, would appreciate it.
Okay. I assume that you don't want me to share the screen because of Senator Collmore's issues. And plus, I am having computer issues right now. I don't think I could share my screen.
Well, it's probably a good idea we don't ask you to share your screen.
Yeah. But the bill as recommended by House Ag is on your website underneath the tab bill, and it's H218 is recommended out of House Ag and Forestry. So generally, you know that raw milk is allowed to be sold in the state by certain producers who meet specific requirements, and there are requirements for delivery and sale at farmers markets. What H218 would do would allow tier 2 producers, those who meet additional requirements for health and safety, to sell raw milk at farm stands or at CSA organizations. So that's generally what the bill does. So stepping through the bill specifically, Section 1 amends the chapter in Title 6, Chapter 152, related to the sale of raw milk. The first change is in the definitions, 6 BSA 2776. There are two definitions of added, one for community supported agriculture organization is a farm or group of farms subject to the RAPs that grow, raise, or produce agricultural products for consumer shareholders or subscribers who pledge or contract to buy a portion of the agricultural products of the farm or group of farms. Then there's a definition of farm stand, was a site on a farm subject to the RAPs where agricultural products principally produced on the farm are sold to the public. Then you get into the general standards for both tier 1 and tier 2 producers of raw milk. The first change is to have an exception to the provision that milk must be sold directly from the producer to the consumer for personal consumption only and shall not be resold. Because obviously, if the producer is providing milk to a farm stand or CSA where the milk was not originally produced, they're not selling it directly from the producer to the consumer. So there needs to be an exception there. Then the Agency of Agriculture asked for some clarifications in the testing requirements for the animals that produce raw milk. And first, it clarifies that the rabies vaccination for the animals must be administered by a licensed veterinarian. Similarly, the brucellosis and tuberculosis testing that's required must be conducted by a licensed veterinarian. And then similarly, the brucellosis and tuberculosis requirement when an animal joins the herd, the testing must be conducted by a licensed veterinarian. And then you can basically go down to 2778, which is the requirements for tier 2 producers. But before we go there, let's look at who a tier 2 producer is. So go to page 8 of the version of the bill that's on your website, line 10, subsection F. A tier 2 producer is one who sells more than 87.5 gallons to 350 gallons of unpasteurized milk per week and meets the requirements of subsections A through D. They have to be subject to inspection by the agency. There are specific bottling requirements. There are specific testing requirements.
How many gallons again, Michael?
It's 87.5 to 350. No, a raw milk producer cannot sell more than 350 gallons of raw milk a week.
Yeah.
And I want to point out the bacteria testing requirements on page 9, lines 8 through 10. And then there is an antibiotic provision. This came up in the House. It basically provides that if an animal is given antibiotics, that animal's milk cannot be used for sale. Okay. So then you come to page 10, line 12, section 2778. These are the specific requirements for tier 2 producers for sale or delivery of unpasteurized raw milk. The first change is in that first subsection A, which is saying sale or delivery of unpasteurized milk off the farm at a farm stand or by a CSA organization must meet the requirements of subsection 2777F, which means they need to be a tier 2 producer. Then you get to sale at a farm stand or CSA needs to conform with the following requirements. The person selling or delivering the milk need to inform each customer of the need to keep the milk refrigerated. And then you can skip down to page 11, lines 13 through 15. A producer who may contract with another individual, a farm stand, or a CSA to deliver or sell the unpasteurized milk in accordance with this section. The producer is required, page 11, lines 18 to 21, to provide the Agency of Agriculture with notice of all the farm stands or CSA organizations with whom the producer has contracted to sell the producer's unpasteurized milk. And then you can skip down to page 12, line 15, subsection F. A farm stand or a CSA selling unpasteurized milk produced on a farm other than the farm or farms where the farm stand or CSA is located shall maintain a list of all the customers to whom unpasteurized milk is sold, including their contact information and the date of purchase and the amount purchased. That farm stand or CSA organization needs to submit those records required under subdivision 1 to the producer weekly. So the producer's records are available to the Agency of Agriculture, and the Agency of Agriculture wants to know where raw milk was sold and to whom, in case there is a health issue, and they want to have those records kind of on a timely basis. The agency said weekly submission to the producer is sufficient for them. On page 13, line 3, you'll see that the farm stand or CSA needs to store the milk in a refrigerated unit or other adequate storage. It's capable of keeping the milk at 40 degrees Fahrenheit or lower in a sanitary and effective manner. And they must display the sign required for producers under subdivision 2777 D6. I think most of you have seen the sign before because you've all been on the committee when you've looked at raw milk bills in the past. So I don't know if we need to review the sign again.
Did we reduce the size of that sign or?
You did a couple of things. First, you required the agency to have a copy of the sign that could be basically printed from the web available. And then you did reduce the size of the sign. It used to be pretty big. I can't remember how big, but it used to be big. And
I know it was 4 feet by
yes,
8.
it was something like that, Senator Starr. And you reduced it to 8 1/2 inches by 11 inches.
Yeah. Thank you.
And then there's 2 subsections left. The sale of unpasteurized milk by a farm stand or a CSA shall be deemed farming under 10 VSA 600122. This is to avoid the blueberry muffin issue. Remember, that if the blueberry muffin is not principally produced on the farm, then it could potentially subject that farm stand to Act 250. So if a farm stand is selling raw milk from another producer and the Act 250 coordinator walks into the farm stand and that's the only thing they're selling that day, technically what they're selling from the farm stand is not principally produced on the farm. To avoid that issue, you just say that the raw milk sold at a farm stand or by a CSA is farming. The farm stand has to be on a farm that's subject to the RAPs. The farms that are part of the CSA have to be subject to the RAPs. So you're basically saying that farms that are subject to the RAPs can sell milk produced by another farmer. And that's still going to be considered farming. And then last, the secretary may inspect a farm stand or CSA selling unpasteurized milk under this section during reasonable hours for the purposes of determining compliance with the section. And then the act takes effect on July 1, 2021. And that is H218 as passed by the House.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Michael. If we could back up, if you would back up a little about the list of customers sent to the agency. There was one section there, and I think you had producers in it.
Right, so it's page 12, line 18, and the requirements for the farm stand or CSA. As you know, when a producer sells directly to a consumer or delivers milk to a consumer at a farmer's market, they need to maintain a list of the customers to whom they sell or deliver to. And that's for the basically what we now all know is contact tracing. for the agency to be able to trace the customers that purchased the milk in case there is a health issue. So the committee, House Ag Committee, and the agency wanted to make sure that there's still a record of those customers that purchased this milk from a farm stand or CSA organization. So that farm stand or CSA needs to maintain a list of customers, and they need to submit those records to the producer, not to the agency.
That's where I'm getting confused. I thought the farmer would be the producer.
The producer of the milk, right?
Yeah.
Right. That is, they are the producer. They sell or contract with the farm stand to sell
Okay.
the raw milk. The farm stand or the CSA needs to keep a record, and they need to submit those records to the producer weekly, so that there's one place that the Agency of Agriculture can go in order to find those records and do, for lack of a better term, contact tracing if there's a health issue.
Yeah, gotcha. So that's where if you're the farmer producing the milk and you take it to a TSA off the farm to sell or to mix in with their other products, then the person selling the milk has to let the producer, who's a farmer, know the customer's name and contact. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, so I got it. Brian?
Thank you, Bobby. So Michael, how many tier 2 people are there in the state? Do you know?
That's a great question. I think it's between 8 and 11, but I'm not exactly sure.
Okay.
Molly probably knows. Molly's got
Actually,
her hand
she's
up.
just added in the chat. There's 12.
Okay.
And so if the milk is going to be sold at a farm stand, does that mean that there has to be a refrigerator right at the stand?
It has to be in a refrigerated unit that's capable of keeping the milk at a 40 degrees Fahrenheit or lower in a sanitary and effective manner. Yes.
Would there ever be occasions when that farm stand was unoccupied though?
That's a possibility, yes. That was discussed about whether or not the farm stand, in order for the farm stand to sell, that the farm stand had to be staffed. And there were concerns from advocates that would be difficult for many farms to do. And you could probably just put that as an issue to talk to the advocates about, because they'll provide better testimony and basis for that than I could.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. If there are no other questions, Anthony?
I have two quick ones. Michael, we talk a lot about tier 2. I presume there's a tier 1. Can you remind me like what the tiers are?
Sure. So that's up in 2777. So on page 8, line 10, subsection F, those are the tier 2 producers, those selling 87.5 to 350 gallons of unpasteurized milk per week. And they have the additional requirements about inspection, bottling, testing, etc. And a tier 1 was a producer selling 87.5 or fewer gallons of unpasteurized milk per week. That meets the requirements of 2777 A through D. So that's the tier 2 has to meet 27 A through D as well. They just have to meet the additional requirements to 2777 F, which tier 1 does not have to meet.
And can you just please remind me how often the producer has to send the list to the ag department, or do they send it to the ag department?
Each week.
I thought it was every week, but I'm just not sure.
No, they don't send they send they don't send the list each week. Hold on. Oh.
It's not a big deal if you can't find
they
it. I was
just they maintain that list, and so they have to register with the agency, and they maintain a list of customers, and the agency has access to the list. I don't believe they ever have to submit the list to the agency.
Okay.
That's a tier 1, right, Michael? Because
Well,
tier 2,
that's A through D, right? That's what they all have to maintain, and then in tier 2,
it's a weekly.
well, that's the testing, and they have to keep the testing for on file for 1 year, and then they have to submit to the agency annually a report. I don't see them submitting the list weekly at all. I don't believe they do to the agency. It's just available to
Right.
the agency.
Okay.
And let me just, the agency likely under its enforcement authority could say to a producer that they would like a producer to submit their list, but it's not a mandate underneath this section.
Any other, if there are no other questions, I don't know, Ken, if you want to go first, or Julie, if you're on a time restraint, do either of you have a preference on when you start, or no?
One,
I really
can start.
don't. My name was first on the list and I can go first, but Julie, you're in the working world and I am not. So if you'd like to go first, be my guest.
Sure, that'd be great.
Okay, well, welcome, Julie, and nice to have you with us this morning.
Thank you, Senator Starr and committee. I appreciate having the opportunity to be here with you and share some thoughts. As I said earlier, I'm Dr. Julie Smith, and I'm with the university, but note that what I share, my opinion, my comments are not that of the university. They are mine alone. Also, I want to mention I am a member of the American Veterinary Medical Association's Food Safety Advisory Committee, and we've been reviewing a raw milk related document. And if any of you have heard from Dr. Eileen Wolf in the past, you might find some of my remarks to be similar to hers. And I think what I'm going to share with you bears repeating if you have heard it before. And it's more to give you a kind of a background sense as you're working your way through, some of the details of this bill, just to keep some of the big picture things in mind about raw milk. So if we go back in time, a common illness from raw milk prior to the passage of the Pasteurized Milk Ordinance was tuberculosis. And control programs for tuberculosis and brucellosis in this country have been fairly successful and significantly reduced the risk of these diseases being transmitted through dairy products. Pasteurization ensures this is the case. Despite these diseases being well controlled in this country, other pathogens and disease-causing microorganisms are still a concern, particularly those that cause foodborne illness. Those carrying antimicrobial resistance are of particular concern. Here's the short list of some of the milk-borne pathogens of concern today. Campylobacter species, Salmonella species, Shiga toxin producing E. coli, also known as STEC, Listeria monocytogenes, Brucellosis species, Cryptosporidium species, which is a protozoan parasite that takes only 10 oocysts or eggs to cause illness in a human, and Coxiella burnetii, the cause of Q fever, which is also a select agent. So I'd like to go on and share the following statistics from a 2017 article in the journal Emerging Infectious Diseases and 2020 data from the Centers for Disease Prevention and Control, the CDC. From 2009 to 2014, unpasteurized milk and cheese were found responsible for 96% of illnesses caused by the consumption of contaminated dairy products. Such products were consumed by only 3.2% and 1.6% of the population consuming milk and cheese respectively. However, on the basis of exposure risk, consumers of unpasteurized dairy products were over 800 times more likely to experience an illness and 45 times more likely to be hospitalized than consumers of pasteurized dairy products. Such outbreaks are highly correlated with the legality of raw milk sales. Slightly over 80% of milk-borne illnesses occurred in states where it was legal to sell raw milk or raw milk products. Some argue that foodborne illness occurs from pasteurized products too, and this is true. But from an exposure risk perspective, it is much more likely to develop foodborne illness from unpasteurized products. For instance, in the 6 years from 2009 to 2014, there were 53 outbreaks of Campylobacteriosis linked to unpasteurized milk products. These outbreaks resulted in 465 illnesses and 56 hospitalizations, compared to only one outbreak with 2 illnesses linked to pasteurized milk. In the same time period, there were 8 outbreaks of salmonellosis with 83 illnesses and 29 hospitalizations linked to raw dairy product consumption. No salmonellosis linked to consumption of pasteurized dairy products. Thus, in the same time frame, not only were 96% of illnesses linked to dairy products from unpasteurized dairy products, but more than 95% of the illnesses linked to raw dairy products were caused by Campylobacter or Salmonella, bacteria that we're not requiring testing for. What about brucellosis? This is one of the diseases all cattle in the herd must be tested for if they're selling to sell raw milk. A fairly recent case exemplifies the challenges that brucellosis can cause to human health and for the human and animal health authorities. 3 unrelated cases of brucellosis investigated by the CDC between July 2017 and November 2018 were attributed to the consumption of raw milk containing vaccine strain Brucella RB51. This strain of bacteria was specifically developed to allow vaccinated cattle to be differentiated from infected cattle because it doesn't cause the typical antibody response in animals receiving the vaccine. It also happens to be resistant to 2 antibiotics, rifampin and penicillin, which are commonly used to treat brucellosis in humans. Because of the difficulty in treating human infections with the RB51 strain, the CDC issued official health advisories in 2 of the cases. It just so happened in some of those cases that the milk was also consumed by people in several states. So in response to that series of outbreaks, the CDC updated their letter to public health personnel, which is titled "The Ongoing Public Health Hazard of Consuming Raw Unpasteurized Milk," which recommended further restricting or prohibiting the sale and distribution of raw milk and other unpasteurized dairy products. Will the routine testing required of certain raw milk producers assure safety? Unfortunately, tests indicative of fecal contamination or sanitation issues, total bacteria counts, and coliform counts do not reveal whether or not any specific pathogens are present in the milk. Microbial contamination of raw milk can occur at multiple stages throughout the production process. Dirt does not have to be visible to be deadly. Properly maintaining cold chain, especially when transporting products, can be difficult. Thus, regardless of the legality of selling or purchasing raw milk, it is recommended for those purchasing raw milk to avail themselves of a method to safely and easily pasteurize the milk at home. Risk management by education, the health warning sign, and limiting volume sold are imperfect protections. Most insurance companies will not provide liability coverage for producers selling raw milk for these reasons. That concludes my testimony.
I think I'm gonna, if you can excuse me, I'm gonna go get a glass of raw milk.
I hope you pasteurized it.
Thank you very much. Could you send us that information that you just presented, Julie?
For sure. Should I send it to
Linda?
To Linda, okay.
Okay. Those are very interesting facts and figures, that's for sure. Chris?
Julie, I'm curious if you can help us understand, are you in touch with counterparts in New Hampshire? And I can't remember what they do in Maine, but in New Hampshire, raw milk is available in the grocery store, and it's got to be labeled and stuff, but which is pretty far from what we're talking about here. And are there routinely deaths over there? It's always hard to sort of distinguish between the what's possible and what's occurring, and trying to thread that needle. So I'm curious, are you in touch with your counterparts over in New Hampshire, or folks in New Hampshire that are following this closely, and are they just, is it proving to be dangerous with their more lackluster approach?
I do not know about the situation in New Hampshire. I can't speak to that. I do know that from a risk management perspective, that we as people have a real challenge with understanding and interpreting risk. So when we have risks that are fairly infrequent, which is the case with disease issues from raw milk, we may think that there's not a problem. But when there is a problem and someone's child dies, then we recognize that, oh, it can be a pretty severe problem. And so it's all that you're doing is managing the risk. You can't make it go away.
Yeah. Are there any other questions from committee for Julie? If not, thanks a lot for your time this morning, Julie, and you're more than welcome to stay on if you have the time, but if you need to leave, feel free to also check out. And we'll move on to Kent. Good morning to you, and it's good to see you again, and welcome to the committee.
All right, well, thank you, Senator Starr. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before the committee and providing a chance to clearly state VVMA's position on expanding the market for raw milk as proposed in H218. I opened my testimony on February 23rd before the House Committee on Agriculture and Forestry with a plea to not expand the sale of unpasteurized milk to non-producer farm stands and through CSAs to Vermont. To allow for full discussion around modern PCR testing techniques and complete consumer liability protection, please consider tabling action on H218 until such time as the legislature has a better understanding of how raw milk can and should be tested in order to provide the safest product for Vermonters. Prior to passing the House chamber, Representative Carl Rosenquist offered an amendment to require specific human pathogen PCR testing. It was apparent that additional time was needed to research an economically feasible and convenient method to provide improved protection for Vermont raw milk consumers. Again, as a brief intro, I'm presenting as the co-chair of the Vermont Veterinary Medical Association Government Relations Committee, and my focus is on large animal topics. I am a retired dairy exclusive veterinarian, and I served a wide variety of large animal or of farm styles in our area for 43 years. For the past 6 bienniums, I've been allowed to testify before this committee on raw milk regulation and other topics, of course, and appreciate the opportunity to appear again today. The purpose of my testimony is to raise a series of questions that the VVMA Government Relations Committee feels need to be fully investigated before acting on H218. After giving testimony in House Agriculture and Forestry, I feel that these questions were thoroughly discussed. With all due respect for this committee's precious time, especially while it's addressing public health and financial recovery issues brought on by the COVID pandemic, we feel that this bill requires time and research that will not fit neatly into this legislative agenda this year. As this committee has come to expect from VVMA testimony over the past 12 years, I'm placing into the record updates on new foodborne illness cases which originated from consumption of unpasteurized milk and unpasteurized milk containing products. Less than 2 weeks prior to my testimony to House Ag on February, and that would have been on February 12th, 2012, and identified as 2021 Maine Public Health Alert, which should be in your packet. The Maine CDC is reporting a Campylobacter outbreak associated with unpasteurized milk marketed in New Hampshire. Don't ask me how Maine milk got into New Hampshire. That would seem to be a violation of federal law, but that's the facts. And you can find this health advisory statement in my testimony, my written testimony that was turned in, and it says that over 30 individuals were treated and 2 were hospitalized. That notice goes on to list several CDC sites that provide strong evidence that the risk of foodborne illness far outweigh any health benefits that unpasteurized milk is perceived to provide. You can view the CDC graphic on the last 3 pages of the packet that I submitted. This CDC information is especially meaningful since we've come to trust their guidance, as our state's health department has provided the nation's strongest COVID recovery by following CDC recommendations. When we consider that the world's been shut down by a virus that most likely came from an animal source, it seems like a very strange time to be expanding raw milk sales and ignoring improved protection that modern testing techniques and pasteurization would provide. I'm really happy that Julie went before me and explained the study that I was going to cite next, which in my packet is the Coaster PDF, and it was submitted in 2019 in one of your previous considerations, but I presented it again. And just to go to the summary, it states that the number of reported foodborne outbreaks continues to increase over the past decades. Take-home message is, as consumption of unpasteurized dairy products grows, illnesses will increase steadily. Continued increases in availability will result in continued increases in illness. We are pleased that Vermont has had few documented foodborne illnesses due to raw milk consumption. It seems to be bucking this national trend, but we would point out that Dr. Natalie Quitt of the Vermont Health Department did report out Vermont cases, and that contraindicates information that no Vermont cases have occurred. We've heard that said a few times, and that it's contradicted by the Vermont Health Department. So I'd like to go back to discussing questions about H218, as the committee is immersed to work to benefit the whole Vermont agriculture community. to address climate change and water quality and working to be sure that economically challenged Vermonters are fed, we're asking that the bill's proponents report on how many producers, retailers, and consumers are being assisted by expanding this unpasteurized market. So after we went through the testimony, and we've heard it this morning, that the answer to that is that there are 12. There are 12 tier 2 producers. And I think the Ag Agency said there were 2 more that were applying that are going to be affected by this legislation, I suppose with the hope of adding more. But that's where we're at right now. We're talking about 12 tier 2 producers that we're working for here. The next question is if state and secondary retailers are confident in the testing procedures and liability protections that are in place. As pasteurized milk producers are asking to expand their markets and include secondary retailers and offsite marketing. Speaking with my former practice manager, who now happens to be the president-elect of the VMEMA, she requested why is investment in brucellosis and TB testing and rabies emphasized and specific human pathogen testing being ignored? More routine culturing of unpasteurized milk for human pathogens would do a lot more to directly protect the consumer. Current state required tests were developed to assure proper milk handling for unpasteurized milk that is going to be pasteurized. These are tests that I learned about in bacteriology class 50 years ago. Sorry to admit it's been that long since I was in vet school. And my professors were the ones that developed these tests. And that was 30 years before I even got into veterinary college. So it really doesn't ensure that human pathogens are not present. Raw bacteria counts that are currently used give us the insurance that a bacteria load in raw milk would make it acceptable to be pasteurized before consumption. It doesn't say that human health pathogens are not present. I'd also like you to review an excellent description of a modern raw milk dairy that's owned by a former Essex, Vermont native, Dr. Meg Cattell. Dr. Cattell is now currently totally immersed at Colorado State University in performing COVID research and is not available to testify, but she gave me permission to share the Windsor Dairy article that's listed as a reference. The article was presented to the National Mastitis Council in 2015 and describes more specific PCR testing that she used to protect her customers. When she developed this test and whole protocol, she specifically mentioned to me that she had studied the Vermont test requirements at that time and used them to help build her model. In 8.5 years of PCR testing on her brown Swiss grass-fed herd, she discarded 7 tanks of milk due to contamination. 4 of them were Campylobacter, 2 were Salmonella, and 1 was E. coli. This farm follows exceptional hygiene practices, and they were not content to rely on 80-year-old technology that was developed for pasteurized food markets to protect her customers. In the past, Vermont may have excused smaller tier 1 producers for more expensive testing, but as these tier 2 markets are that are going to have improved profitability because of being allowed to expand, it seems like it's a logical time to ask these tier 2 producers to also expand their techniques to protect the consumer. This could be an opportunity to set Vermont milk apart and build the Vermont brand of quality in its ag products, and that was the point of Representative Rosenquist's amendment. Unfortunately, the House Ag Committee did not take up the question until Representative Rosenquist presented the amendment to include PCR testing during the reading of H-218 on the House floor. An excellent source of testing at Cornell University was cited by the House Ag Committee and dismissed as too expensive. I can tell you from my experience as a veterinarian practice owner and manager that we always performed a thorough survey of several labs, certified labs, and we would find a great variation in the cost of what these tests could be provided for, mainly by the support that these state labs got from the ag community in their states. Our overnight research came up with more affordable and convenient methods than was cited from the Cornell study. And we'd like the committee to look at this. We hope that you will find time to allow Dr. Andrea Eder from UVM to testify on PCR testing principles and tell about her work at UVM. And just as I was sitting down, I saw a paper come in from her that VBMA will be submitting for you to read. At the end of the bill's walkthrough testimony, a need to identify liability protection for secondary retailers was mentioned. This liability issue is going to be a tough hurdle for expanded sales into secondary markets. Many of my former dairy clients will not sell unpasteurized milk directly from their bulk tanks because they have not purchased a specific insurance policy rider on their farm in case they're asked to cover medical expenses on people that consume this raw milk. As layers are added to this proposed supply change, this liability should be addressed. It would seem to be prudent to require farm producers to provide a certificate of insurance for this specific policy rider when they are distributing product, especially when expanding to secondary markets. Progressive raw milk associations in other states, like the Rocky Mountain Raw Milk Association, for instance, are helping their members procure reasonably priced insurance riders because they're negotiating as a group with insurance companies to provide reduced rates for their members. And we would encourage Vermont Raw Milk Associations to follow that example. During the bill's walkthrough, there was a reference to a foodborne outbreak that originated from ice cream that was made with unpasteurized milk. And here's where I've got a question is, will products like these be allowed to be sold at non-producer farm stands and CSAs? In other words, what about soft cheeses under 60 days maturity, puddings, dips, butter, and anything else that is made with unpasteurized milk or that is not baked or cooked? Does that liability lie with the farmer, the food preparer, or the retailer? And what's the time frame on this bill? With the added responsibilities that the health department and the Ag Agency Vet Services have taken on with COVID-19 pandemic, is this really a reasonable time to be adding new responsibilities and public health concerns on our agency staff? I think I'll stop there. Julie already mentioned antibiotic testing. We noted that that was not being required now because it was just being assumed that the raw milk producers weren't using antibiotics. I know that organic farms that send into a processor are normally tested just like a non-organic farm. And every now and then a positive test pops up. Usually it's a case of a penicillin-like a mold that shows up in the feed that is contaminated sample. But every now and then there could be a disgruntled employee or some enemy that taints a batch of milk. I suppose that could happen with a raw milk producer. Not likely, but it's a really simple test that could be added to the regime that's being put in place. So I'm going to close. Please do not act on reducing requirements or allowing unpasteurized sales at farmers markets or retail outlets during this legislative session. Please allow for a more extensive investigation and testimony on this subject so that Vermont products in this state are as safe as they can possibly be. Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you, Ken. Maybe we'll have some questions. Michael, are you still? Yeah, you're with us. Does this allow the sale of products or just fluid milk, Michael, to be sold?
Right now, it's just milk, fluid milk.
So like the issue of the ice cream or other butter, they wouldn't be allowed to sell that with being manufactured with raw milk, right?
So this chapter of law does not address that. So it's not authorized under this chapter of law. And I don't believe it's authorized under the dairy products chapter of law in Title VI.
Yep.
So I would, without it being specific, there's no specific provision that says raw milk dairy product can or cannot be sold. But because this does not address it, and because the dairy products chapter does not address it, I would say it's not authorized.
Yeah. Well, that's, I guess, one good thing. Anthony?
Don't we though sell and consume a lot of raw milk cheese?
Yes, there is raw milk cheese, and there's standards for that.
And I also have a question for either of the other witnesses. You both mentioned the pandemic, the current pandemic, as sort of a cautionary tale about why we should go slow on this issue around raw milk. But I think, correct me if I'm wrong, one of the differences, I know that there are some diseases that you say are linked to raw milk, but those are not contagious diseases as far as I can tell. I mean, it's one thing for me to manage my own risk and say, I want to drink raw milk. It's another thing for me to say I'm going to do something that's going to put my neighbors in danger or my family in danger by, breathing on them or, being in the same room with them without a mask. I see the things as really being very different. So I don't think any of the risk factors around raw milk are contagious.
Is there any answer to that question? The diseases, do you know, Ken, if the diseases that you might catch from raw milk can you pass that on?
To my knowledge, I think that's a decent point that Senator Polina brings up, and to my knowledge, it wouldn't be that way unless the example that is brought up is if a consumer would buy raw milk and then serve it at a birthday party, and you'd have a dozen little kids go home sick. But that, we really can't address that. I understand that. My main point is that our state has had a really good record on coming out of the pandemic because we have really valued CDC's guidance. And CDC's guidance on raw milk is very clear. It's very, very well spelled out. And I would just like for the committee to look at what they say about it and take that into their thinking, because they really are strongly recommending against it.
Yeah, we could.
Yeah, it's available in about 45 states, if I remember correctly, 47 states maybe. So it's just interesting that I understand what you're saying about the CDC, but on the other hand, it's available in stores and like Senator Pearson said, even in regular grocery stores in many states. So it's an interesting dynamic.
So Ken, there was some raw milk produced in Maine that ended up being sold in New Hampshire, and people got sick from it. Did you report that?
I saw the alert and I put it in my packet. I hope that my packet was distributed properly.
Well,
and so all I was doing was passing on that alert. I think that that the Vermont Ag Agency, the dairy section, I think they followed up on that, and they'd be a very good source for you to get more information on that particular case, I think.
yeah. And Linda may have your packet, but I haven't gotten it sent to me yet. Brian, do you have your hand up?
I did, Bobby, thank you.
Yeah.
So, Ken, thank you very much for your testimony. You brought up a few issues that I hadn't thought about, the insurance issue for one, and the PCR testing. When you are making remarks, are you speaking on behalf of the whole Vermont Veterinary Medical Association?
Yes, I'm the chair of a government relations committee, and And so that's my function as part of that committee, yes.
Okay. And I do take your point. And obviously I think the chair is already planning that we hear from both the Vermont Health Department and the Agency of Agriculture, because this obviously is in their wheelhouse. And yeah, this is interesting.
And what about Dr. Cattell? Is she related to any Cattell's up in Franklin County? Or is that a different crew?
It's spelled Cattell.
So it's a different Cattell.
Yes.
Yep.
Did you have any material in your packet in regards to her findings that you reported on that we'll have to look at?
Absolutely, yes. And we'll get those sent out right away. Yes.
Yeah. And what about, did you check out anything on whether we have insurance companies that carry or that will sell liability insurance to farmers to protect them if there is a problem? Did you look into that at any length?
I have, during House Ag testimony, the representative for Nationwide talked about, the policy that he recommends to his clients, and the co-op insurance provides it. I think it's commonly available.
Yeah. Because it might be good to, but House Ag didn't have them in when you were there, right?
Roy Folsom from Nationwide testified before House Ag.
Yeah. But I didn't see anything in the bill about requiring a producer to have that. No. Brian, did you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So can we go back to the PCR testing for just a second? When you say expensive, Kent, if you could give us an idea of what you mean in terms of dollars and cents, and are there Vermont companies that do that, or would that have to be sent out of state?
We were given one evening to research that and come back. What we came back with was at UVM. There's a PhD, and she started there recently, Andrea Edders, and I just saw her. She wrote a paper that will get submitted to you, and she is willing to testify. She's doing research in her lab there. She's very interested in working with the state and working with raw milk. And she, I don't know if I should, one of her thoughts was to get a sustainable ag grant to get the equipment in her lab and work right on it there in Burlington. And then it also came to our attention with the new lab in Randolph that, we've got to look into that and see if the equipment isn't already there. If the milk samples are being sent there already, wouldn't it be simple if we could just take them across the hall and provide this other testing? The numbers that she was citing for the cost of the test with a reasonable amount of lab time, with experienced people, was in the range of $25 to $50 for all 4 pathogens. And that was, it's significant savings. And that's what I mean when, with our vet practice, I would go all over the country, or I'd shop around all over the country and find out which labs were, really good at which tests and really wanted to provide them, and wouldn't charge me a huge out-of-state accession fee. And if you have a little time to work on this, I think there's a chance to come up with a really good solution here that, that could put Vermont milk ahead of everybody else's.
Thank you.
Is that something that your association is gonna look into, Kent? Is future testing and, or should we pursue that?
Well, what I'd propose is if you could consider what Dr. Edders would say in her testimony, and if there is an appetite to perform this further testing, that it seemed like it would be a good project for UVM and the Ag Agency, the dairy section, to work together on to everybody's benefit.
Yep. Yeah. Good morning, Corey.
Morning.
Yeah, good to have you
Ken,
back.
how are you?
Your constituent is sitting on my screen just above you.
Yeah. Well, him and I've had plenty of conversations about this issue. So,
Well, it's very important that, you know, both ways. If we're going to do it safely, and if it's going to, you know, help some farmers make sure that it is safe to, or as safe as possible to sell. So, you know, it's a very important issue. Are there other questions for any of the committee members? No? Michael, do you have any questions?
No?
So the doctor from UVM, I don't know if Linda has her name or not. Is that in your packet, Kent?
I will give instructions to our administrator to get those to you. Yes.
Okay, because, you know, we certainly want to hear, you know, from whoever wants to testify. We want to give them an opportunity to do that. If there are no other questions, thank you very much for your time and your testimony, Ken. Certainly, you know, we appreciate both your time and your testimony, and all the good work you've done over the years in behalf of Vermont Ag. So with that, thank you very much. Gail, did we have anyone else on this morning to testify?
I don't believe so. Let me just take a quick look here. Excuse me.
I don't see anyone else on my list, but I didn't know if anybody was in the waiting room or listening that wanted to testify. We got about 10 more minutes before we've got to move on to our next meeting.
Yeah, there are no updates to the agenda. There's nobody in the waiting room, and Linda has not informed me that anybody else is coming.
Yeah, Michael?
I just noted that Molly Wills has her hand raised. And she's not in the waiting room, she's on the call.
Oh, I guess I didn't see. Yes, I see her name at the bottom, but no hand. Molly, good morning, and we've got, like I said, about 10 more minutes. If you'd like to testify, we'd be glad to hear from you. So welcome.
Thank you, Senator Starr. And as way of introduction, my name is Molly Wills, and I'm the Director of Grassroots Organizing at Rural Vermont. And I have been working with Vermont's community of raw milk producers for the past 10 years. And this is a community of folks that has been producing an incredibly high quality product with a very strong safety record. As Dr. Henderson did mention, there is some data from the Vermont Department of Health about a minor outbreak that occurred at one point, but in general, since raw milk has been regulated, the sale of fluid milk has a very good safety record. And I would also like to point out that many of the studies that you will receive in your testimony are related to value-added raw dairy products rather than fluid milk. And just to be crystal clear, we are talking about the sale of fluid milk consumption for Tier 2 producers. And it is true that there are only currently 12 Tier 2 raw milk producers in the state. And this is due to the fact that the regulations are onerous. The regulations are also working and helping us maintain this very high quality safety record. The current largest barrier towards Tier 2 production for folks that wish to sell raw milk and access greater markets is the testing requirements that are currently laid out in the bill. And the statute requires that the milk testing happen at an accredited lab, and there is only one such lab in the state of Vermont. UVM is not an accredited lab, and those milk samples cannot currently be conducted there. Raw milk producers who live far from the state lab are not able to drop off their samples twice a month, as is required by current statute. That's a barrier. We have a quote from one raw milk producer in Brattleboro that it costs them $272 each time they take a trip to drop their samples off. And that is mostly in employee time and gas mileage. The tests themselves are free, provided by the state of Vermont. And the current tests that are required give a very strong indication of animal health and overall herd health. And so this is a preventative way of maintaining sort of a bird's eye view of the health of your herd and the quality of your milk. And if you do get a high test result, there is provisions in the law that prevent you from selling raw milk until you have received an updated test result. And the only instances that I have heard about this have been false positives for farmers. I also just would like to speak to the PCR testing for a moment. I spoke to the lab at Cornell, which is the closest lab that we're aware of that could provide these tests. And in speaking directly to the lab technicians, I was quoted upwards of $160 per day to provide those 4 human pathogen tests for these producers. And I don't think I need to spend a lot of time mentioning how inconceivable that is and how much that would nullify any gains that are had by expanding market access for Tier 2 producers. The statute, as it is currently written, if this became law, it would be an incentive for more people to become Tier 2 producers, and that would be more people that are held to a higher, stricter standard of safety and testing. And it would also benefit the farm stands and the CSAs that are interested in selling this product. Rural Vermont has a number of sign-on letters for raw milk producers that are interested in this legislation passing, and also farm stand and CSA owners that would like to sell raw milk and are regularly asked by their customers to provide this product. And there are over 30 farm stand and CSA owners right now that are ready and willing to carry this when and if it is legal. And currently in the statute, the House Ag Committee deliberated for a long time about the insurance issue. And in the end, they decided that they didn't feel comfortable mandating anything, and it should really be up to the producer and the farm stand owner, who both of which are liable jointly if there was an issue. And it's true that access to raw milk insurance can be difficult for some people, but rural Vermont maintains a list of providers that do insure raw milk producers. And despite threats over the years of these companies not being willing to cover raw milk producers, at the end of the day, it has been evident that money talks, and they are not actually dropping many people who are selling raw milk. I think it's important that we look at this legislation from a food security and food sovereignty perspective. We are all probably acutely and freshly aware of the experience of having empty grocery store shelves with the onset of the pandemic. And at the end of the day, the more small-scale diversified farms we have across the state, the stronger Vermont's economy will be and the more food secure we will be. For folks who are interested in milking cows for a living, there are not a lot of opportunities to go into dairy farming. If you don't have an existing family contract that you have access to, and you're not interested in going into a multitude of debt to become a large farm operation, there is virtually no market. The value added dairy market is oversaturated in many ways, and there's just not a lot of space. And raw milk provides farmers the opportunity to get upwards of $12 a gallon for some folks to sell this product. When if you're looking at conventional producers, they're often losing $1.50 per gallon that they produce. And obviously, a raw milk producer is very different from someone who is shipping dairy often, though there is some overlap. But in general, raw milk producers have significantly smaller herds. They're able to have much closer eyes and relationships with their animals. And truly, it's in everyone's best interest to provide the safest, highest quality product available. And there was some farmers that testified in the House Agricultural Committee that showed their test results to those committee members and essentially proved the fact that they have a squeaky clean product that is just going above and beyond the current testing requirements that I would just like to say again, have been keeping people safe. It is working in this state. And I'm very thankful for the committee's interest and time spent on this issue. And I would love to be able to bring in raw milk producers, as well as farm stand and CSA owners to testify about how important this issue is to their farm businesses, to our food security, and also to support the next generation of farmers, because raw milk is not going away. As has been mentioned, many states allow for legal raw milk sales, and New Hampshire allows for sale of value-added products, as well as buying raw milk in grocery stores. Maine has a similar legislation. And I have a state-by-state breakdown that I would be happy to share about what exactly is legal in each state that allows for raw milk to be sold. And I could pass that along to the committee.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Molly. There's certainly going to be more time for you and other producers to come and testify. It may not be next week, but it could be the week after, and we'll certainly keep you in the loop and watch our webpage and things. You'll see when we're going to get that back on the schedule. But thank you for being with us this morning. Appreciate you and your time with us, and we'll stay in touch, I'm sure.
Thank you very much, Senator Starr and committee members.
Anthony, did you have a question before we sign off? Because we have that other meeting coming right up. No, I guess
actually, I'm good.
Yeah, I guess
I
we're
appreciate
all.
that testimony, though.
Pardon?
I appreciate her testimony quite a bit.
Yes, yeah. So thanks again, Molly, for being with us, and we'll look for you in the future. So guys, we'll get off and then we can get signed back in for our joint meeting for the judges. So thanks, and we'll see you later.